Krishna Chaitanya, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, go ahead.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm wondering about, this I had to come up with this question on the fly. Let's see. So I think it's the 8th verse of the Bhakti-rasamrta, and basically we hear about the importance of the name, form, qualities, pastimes, and so on. And sometimes people say that it should be revealed or approached in this order. And I think in the Shikshashtakam, in your translation of the 8th verse of the Bhakti-rasamrta, it does say this: name, form, qualities, in this order. So I'm wondering about the importance of the order and what exactly is that about? Because sometimes it seems like maybe, for instance, I don't know, the form of Krishna doesn't seem to come to me very easily, but sometimes I feel like I've got a sense of his qualities, but that's down the line. Does that question make sense?
Yes, I understand your question.
I can't hear you.
Thank you for that. So there is a gradation, and that is explained by Jiva Goswami in the Bhakti-sindhu, and others have followed his lead as well. Can you hear me, everyone? Krishna?
Yeah. You went to English and mute original, right?
Oh, I didn't do that. I'm sorry. Let me do that now. English. I'm able to do the English, but, oh, wait. Okay. So yes, I appreciate the question, and there is a gradation in relation to your question that is given by Jiva Goswami in Bhakti-sindhu. And there he explains that this gradation in relation to smaranam. So smaranam, there are both different levels of smaranam, from simple remembrance, which could include studying about, and in that way remembering the Sambandha Gyan, and actually consciously withdrawing the senses from sense objects, pratyahara, dharana, the positive side, if you will, from withdrawing the senses, concentrating on Krishna, his name, his form, his qualities, as may be the case. Dhyan, actual meditation, dhruvanusmriti, is kind of a deeper, fixed, prolonged, and samadhi. I think that's the gradation he gives. So while there's a gradation within smaranam, as I've explained, he also gives a gradation in terms of applying that gradation to the name, to the qualities, to the form, and to the leelas of Krishna. Now we hear repeatedly the efficacy of chanting the name, and we don't hear in the same way the virtues, if you will, of hearing about the well, I would say it's one thing to meditate on the name, and we hear the virtues of that. Chant the name to meditate on the name. We would refer to, let's say, japa as dhyan, so a meditation on the name. And the virtues of that are many. We hear about it. We don't hear in the same way the virtues of remembering the form, the qualities, the leelas, and particularly with regard to such remembrance on the form, qualities, and leelas of Krishna being something that anyone can do, the generosity of the leela, of the form. In fact, we hear from Rupa Goswami in his Namastakam in relation to the name and the named, the name of Krishna, and the named here refers to the form of Krishna. We hear that while the two are the same, at the same time, the name is more merciful, because even if we offend the form, the name will stay with us and distributes himself. He distributes himself through the name, even to those who have offended. And so there's a distinction between the name and the other three, the form, the qualities, and the leelas. And the distinction largely is the generosity, the magnanimity of the name. So therefore, Jiva Goswami says, with regard to Smaranam, which has its divisions, as I've mentioned, that one should begin with Nam Smaranam, which, as I say, anyone can do to one extent or another. And what he is explaining there is that out of Nam Smaranam comes Rupa Smaranam, which means meditation on the form, Guna Smaranam, meditating on the qualities of Krishna, and Leela Smaranam, meditating on the pastimes of Krishna. The idea here being that the form, the qualities, and the Leelas of Krishna are all present in his name, and it's through the name that he distributes himself most generously, and in particular, he does so in Kali Yuga, without asking qualification. So, as he's speaking about it, if we chant the name, and I was speaking last week about just hearing the name, well, inside the name is the form, the qualities, and leelas. So they'll come out. They'll, in the context of chanting, the mind will start, the form will appear of Krishna on the mind. Rather than taking the mind and trying to fix it on the form, it will arise naturally. Now, relative to our association and our destiny, if you will, spiritual destiny, then the form of Krishna is going to be tied to that. And similarly, the qualities of Krishna then will be tied to that particular form and the leelas. So if you have the association and the destiny for Sakirasa, for example, or Madhurya Rasa, then the form that's going to arise and appear in the mind and in the heart out of the chanting will be as seen as the Vishaya Lambana, the object of love for those in Sakirasa or Madhurya Rasa respectively. And then that form is going to have particular qualities as well that correspond with it and with that particular bhava or rasa. And similarly, it would transport us into a particular Leela Seva, if you will. So this is how he speaks about this kind of gradation unfolding, if you will, all through the sadhana of Nam, of chanting the name. Now, aside from that, obviously, we can think about the form of Krishna as we've heard about it. We can sing prayers that describe it as it's been described by great devotees. We can repeat them. We can read about the qualities of Krishna and think about them, which ones pertain to which particular bhava, and leelas and so forth. We're going to hear, in the context of hearing, there's some remembering, but this is very kind of a low, if you would refer to it as such, a very low level of remembrance. And with regard to that, outside of what I spoke of earlier, the form, the qualities of leelas coming out of the name and so forth, then I think that if you find that in your mind you're attracted to thinking about the qualities of Krishna and reciting them, contemplating their implications, contemplating, for example, here's a particular quality of Krishna, and what are examples of in the Leela of that quality manifesting and so forth. If you're attracted to doing that more, let's say, than having darshan of the deity and observing the form, or recalling, as I say, prayers that describe the form of Krishna. If you're more attracted to the latter, there's no harm there. That's not an issue. Or reading about the leelas as opposed to reading about the qualities. But they all really, as you go forward, you'll see, if you want to read and study these things, you see they all are a composite. They go together, right? You'll start to see, in this leela, these qualities are manifesting, and it's being discussed from this angle of vision, and so on and so forth. So that all that, if you will, is a kind of like very rudimentary, you could call it rudimentary form of remembrance, of smaranam. What you hear about, and what you talk about, you're going to remember. So in that, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily any restrictions. First, don't think about the qualities. You should think about the form first, or don't think about the qualities. Leelas, you should think about the qualities first. But again, what Jiva Goswami is talking about in terms of a gradation is how they actually unfold in terms of realization. Like, it's one thing to think, as I said earlier, maybe last week, I think, to think of the form of Krishna, to think of the leelas of Krishna. And it's another thing to actually realize them, participate in them, experience that they are within the name, and they're non-different from the name. And the name is a way in which they're expressing themselves. Each name of Krishna, has qualities attached to it and leelas attached to it, and so forth, right? The primary names, Yashodananda, Radhanath, and so forth. I think that's anyway, referring to Jiva Goswami, that's where the idea of the gradation comes from. And I hope that answers your question. If not, you can ask further, or if there's any other comments, I'll entertain them.
That's good for me. Thank you.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Gayatri.
Hare Krishna.
Good morning and congratulations. I got your email. I didn't get a chance to respond, so I'll do so briefly now. Congratulations. Yeah, my blessings in the next stage of your life as it unfolds.
Thank you so much, Kumar. That means everything.
Okay.
Okay, so my question is, I'm reading your little book, Joy of Self.
Uh-huh.
And in chapter 5, which is the means, it speaks of kirtan, and it's mentioning the mridanga and the kartals. And then it says that these instruments are considered eternal participants in group chanting. Other instruments may also be used, yet one must be careful to distinguish between a musical presentation and that which is spiritual. And reading this, it just makes me think that in Kirtan, a lot of the times when I sit down in Kirtan, I can get deeper into meditation on the name. But then normally towards the end, it kind of tends to break into more lively music. People get up and dance. And when I get up and dance, I find myself forgetting more about the meditation on the name, and I think more about the dancing. So in that situation, is it better to kind of stay seated maybe on the side if one is not able to be in that meditation? Because I also remember you saying in North Carolina that one should never doubt ecstasy. And I don't know what ecstasy really is, but maybe dancing is a form of ecstasy.
Well, I appreciate the question. Let me preface my answer with a statement from Rupa Goswami. Yena tena prakarana mana Krishna niveshayat. Somehow or other, we should remember Krishna. How shall we remember? Somehow or other. So what may work for one in a general sense of remembering, may not work for another, and for another, and so forth. So somehow or other. But ISKCON as an organization, which I was born in, if you will, as a disciple of Vishnupada Sri Bhakti-vedanta Swami Prabhupada, was very fond of dancing, I guess you could say. And there was an emphasis on the dancing, which I think was intended to help others to be unintimidated, even as the push to dance could be intimidating. They wanted the devotees to get into it, so to speak, and so they would. I mean, I'm talking about. I don't know now. I mean, I've been out of this ISKCON for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. But when I was a member, it was very prominent, and by contrast, Gaudiya Math, the kirtans were not at all like that, and dancing was only undertaken as a natural outgrowth of the ecstasy of the chanting, and a symptom of bhava, like would be what we call an anubhav. Anubhav would be like with regard to kirtan, raising the hands, dancing, but it's arising out of bliss, out of ecstasy, rather than out of anything external, which it tended to arise out of in ISKCON. I'm not saying one is bad or the other is good, but there's one thing for dancing to be an anubhav of kirtan, and another thing for dancing to be dancing, in the hope that it might help you to become absorbed and actually experience anubhav. I remember once in Los Angeles, Prabhupada was speaking as he would in the morning, and after the class, there would always be a short kirtan. And one of my godbrothers, named Brahmananda Maharaj, was a big fellow. He was dancing. He had kind of like a 1-2 step back and like this, back and forward. And Prabhupada was a little startled by it. And he commented, he said, I saw that Bhavananda was experiencing the bhava. And But then I realized it was just a mental, concoction or something like the dancing. So he wasn't necessarily criticizing, even though I think he used the word mental concoction, but he was distinguishing real dancing that we hear about. For example, in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, the dancing, the weeping, and so forth. These are all anubhavs. Weeping would be like sattvika bhav, anubhavs. So given that history, and excuse me, but then I'll give you a third example, and there's the no dancing unless it actually arises as an anubhav, right? And then there's the dancing in the hopes that it will bring about such anubhavs. I'm speaking about it in a generous way with regard to ISKCON. It could get pretty wild in ISKCON at times, which could become a big distraction, actually. I think the intention was, as I say, they wanted devotees to not be intimidated and jump in and abandon, and lose consideration of what somebody might think and just dance and so forth. But sometimes it could get to a pitch where the last, I'll give you an example. The last kirtan in ISKCON that I was in New York and Brooklyn before Radha Govinda. It was at a time when I was just leaving ISKCON for the shelter of Sridhar Maharaj, and there was a big meeting in New Vrindavan. All the devotees were meeting, and they were concerned about the succession and how the gurus who were representing Prabhupada weren't representing him very well, and so forth. And there were different opinions how to go forward and so forth. And of course, I had come to the conclusion at that point that I should take shelter of Sridhar Maharaj, which wasn't a popular opinion at all. And on my way out, I think I was flying out of New York or something like that. Anyway, I was there, and I was in the Brooklyn Temple, and they had a kirtan, and then during the artik, and they made a circle. They put a guy in the center, and he started doing what they call like a break dance, like, I don't know, like a Michael Jackson or something like that. And I was really turned off by, because it was very much of a distraction from what was really what the kirtan was about. And I took it at the time as, I'm leaving. I'm doing the right thing here. Now, again, I don't want to criticize ISKCON and overly, but the dancing get to a point where it was a total distraction from what was going on. The tension of it was initially and my understanding was not to result in that. But aside from that example of ISKCON and an example of Gaudiya Math, there's another example of the dancing, and that is, there was, and this is more common in India, but there was the devotees in England were doing kirtan, and one Indian gentleman was coming to the kirtan, and during the kirtan, he would fall on the ground and roll and get up and dance, and the devotees didn't know how to deal with it. And so Prabhupada said, kick him in the head and see what happens. Something like that, when he was rolling on the ground. The implication being, if he was really in the ecstasy and the expressing the anubhav, or even the sattvika bhav of pralay, passing out, and so forth, if you kicked him in the head, he wouldn't notice it. But if he got up and complained, you'd see, you're faking, which is the latter was obviously the case. So there's the imitation of bhava, dancing, even imitation tears, rolling on the ground, and so on and so forth. That's one thing. And then there's the dancing with the good intentions, trying to get people fired up, as they would say in ISKCON, and so on, right? And then there's your example of Gaudiya Math and so forth. So I think that, having said that, the dancing is only as good as it's not a distraction. And if in your particular case as an individual, you find it to be distracting, potentially, then you should remain seated if it's helping you to become more absorbed in the chanting. When I say that the chanting kirtan is should not be a musical event, right? What I mean by that, in one sense, is that the chanting is not a form of entertainment. It's not a form of entertainment for ourselves or for the public. That would be the antithesis of what kirtan is, right? It's an act of devotion for the pleasure of Bhagavan. Now you can, for the pleasure of Bhagavan, try to make the kirtan more artful, right? And have someone play the mridanga who actually knows how to play the mridanga and the kartal and so forth. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is said to have been very cautious about this, because in Bengal, there are lots of kirtaniers and they're professional kirtaniers. And he wanted to distinguish the kirtan of Gaudiya Math from the professional kirtaniers who would chant, and it would be musically very attractive, you know, a genre, in the genre of like folk music, right? With the khol of mridanga and the kartal. Maybe they'd bring in an esaraj, an Indian violin, or the harmonium, which is a German instrument. It's been incorporated. And they could chant for a long time, you know, and be very musically attractive. And then afterwards they'd smoke bidis and, you know, whatever. And so this was the professional kirtan that he wanted to distinguish his kirtan from. And so, I mean, I wasn't there, but we've heard, and I heard repeatedly, that he would sing often in kirtan himself, leading and sing off key. On purpose, something like that. So that's an extreme, right? But he wanted to distinguish. I remember in ISKCON, 1 year in Mayapur, they decided to have a kirtan competition. And so the leading kirtaniers from the temple in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and London and Berlin and so on and so forth, they all had their kirtanier, you know, kirtan leader, and they were get up on a stage and they would have kirtan, and then there would be a judging. And I think they did this for a couple of years, but I think that the second year, when Prabhupada closed the whole thing down, they also invited some local Bengali kirtaniers, some professional or semi-professional groups. I don't know all their background and so forth, but Prabhupada, anyway, he closed it down. He didn't like it. He thought, I would say, that it was getting on, you know, getting away from, you know, what it's about, and serving as a distraction. Nowadays, there's all kinds of kirtan that, you know, that runs the risk of being really a form of entertainment. And you see, you know, the album cover, and there's the three guys or gals or whatever on there looking like they would on an ordinary, you know, music album. And, you know, we've made it, and accomplished artists, and, you know, applause and so forth. So you want to be a little careful about that. I mean, that involves a lot of people, but what does it involve a lot of people in? You know, it depends. So I'm giving you some, you know, longer, if you will, history of the affairs. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't incorporate other instruments, only the khol and the kartal. I don't think Bhaktisiddhanta allowed any other instruments. Harmonium, Prabhupada played the harmonium, and it made its way in largely, but I think that the khol and the kartal are percussion instruments that, you know, don't lend themselves in the same way, you know, as other musical instruments do, that can take it in a musical direction which is, not what you want to do. That said, I mean, there are kirtan styles developed by Narottam Thakur and who's the other prominent one, I forget, that are, musically proficient or adept with regard to percussion and so forth. And it's not that, obviously, again, if we're going to perform for Bhagavan, well, you want to do it nicely, right? You want to do it musically nicely and so forth. But that said, really, it depends on the heart of the kirtaneers and each individual devotee in the kirtan. That's what Bhagavan really tastes, embraces, and so forth. But just like you want to cook very nicely, right? So you want to instrumentally or musically do it nicely. But again, for the pleasure of Bhagavan, this is for Krishna, for Radha and Krishna. This is why we're doing it. So those are some thoughts. Does that help?
Yeah. So what I understand is that we need to just check in with ourselves continuously what our intention is if we are actually making the offering to Krishna. Yeah. And then if we cannot stay in the meditation, we take the means necessary to remain in that meditation.
Not only with yourselves, but we're to check in with who are the kirtaneers and what is their intention as far as we can tell. There are statements from our paribar to the effect that one should not enter the kirtan that's not conducted under the auspices of Shuddha Bhakta, a pure devotee. So nowadays that might be a little hard to figure out in a big organization like ISKCON, which you're affiliated with somewhat there because you're living at that, what's it called, the Bhakti House or something?
Krishna House.
Krishna House in Gainesville, Florida. They ISKCON has a lot of different kirtaneers, and I think you can't just say, well, it's because it's an ISKCON, it's bona fide because ISKCON's bona fide. You have to be a little bit thoughtful, not only with regard to your own intentions, but as best you can ascertain what are the intentions of the kirtaneer, and I suppose they all have basically the right intention, but anyway, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kumar.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Raj, I had a quick follow-up. So you mentioned that in the Gaudiya Math, dancing is more like supposed to be like an outcome of bhav or outpouring of bhav, but interestingly, like dancing in front of the deities is one of the 64 angas of sadhana-bhakti. So I guess, is it that you can do it as sadhana as well?
Apparently. I forgot about that anga of given by Rupa Goswami. He says it, dancing before the deity, yeah. Kirtan.
Something like, I just looked it up, it's like learning to dance before the deity or something like that.
Well, yeah, I think that, okay, right. Now, I think that what that really refers to is more like when you arrange a dramatical or performance, like for example, in Jagannath Puri, Ramananda Roy was training ladies who were owned by Jagannath, if you will, to dance in, what would you call it? Dance performances that depicted the Leelas, glorified them, like your Bharatnatyam, like Gaurangi Priya has a Bharatnatyam school, Prem Vidyalaya, I think we call it, and so she teaches young girls how to do the Bharatnatyam, and they enact with different gestures and motions and so forth what is being talked about in the corresponding kirtan, and so that so this is the a kind of form of dancing before the deity that would be an anga of sadhana-bhakti. And again, Ramananda Roy was teaching ladies the dancing and massaging them and so forth, even all completely absorbed in the mood of pleasing Lord Jagannath, and they would have technical performances before Jagannath at different times throughout the year would be the case. So that's different than getting up and just jumping around in front of the deity because of the sound, the musical sound of the kirtan. Prabhupada at one point taught us how to dance. We call it the Swami step or something like that. It was very conservative. So I guess there's a place for that. It was like two hands up and one leg cross over the other and back. It was very simple. I remember once Prabhupada was chanting as he would before the class, Jai Radha Madhava, and I was thinking, well, Prabhupada is chanting, and this means so much to him, so I'm going to dance as he showed. And I was doing exactly as he showed, for his pleasure. It was just totally how I was thinking. And Prabhupada looked at me and nodded and affirmed, yeah, you're doing it right, something like that. That was very, very nice. He was very pleased. So, that was an example. We were following what he showed, kind of a two-step or something. If you want to dance, do it like this. But it did get, quite exaggerated from there, and Prabhupada wasn't present for those type of wild kirtans. But anyway, the dancing as an anga, yes. There's a place for that, and Ramananda Roy is an example of a teacher of that.
Thank you. So the next question is from Madan Mohan from Brighton.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. So my questions related to the three aspects of the absolutes. So it had me thinking. We were studying the Gita locally, and so it's a two-part question. First, that Brahman is sometimes said to be itself is consciousness, like Brahman is consciousness, or the basis of reality or existence. And then Paramatma is said to be cognizance of this existence. So I was wondering what cognizance is lacking, if at all, in the Brahman feature, considering its consciousness that's there in the Paramatma feature. And then also related to that, some say that we pass through these realizations, but it seems, at least to my understanding from a bhakti perspective, that we focus on Bhagavan, and as a result of those realizations, one also has realization of the other aspects of the absolute, if you will. But of course, you wouldn't focus on Paramatma, for example. So I was wondering if you could clarify that, if it's one passes through stages of realization, or one it's just kind of a side effect, if you will.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate the question. Well, I think that the Brahman realization, the Brahman feature of the absolute, which is nirvishesh, it's without qualities, without differentiation, and so forth, that it is a, if you will, it's rather abstract, but contentless. How would you say, yeah, contentless awareness? It doesn't make a lot of sense. How can you be aware of something that's contentless? Well, the example to help us appreciate Brahman realization is deep sleep. We all enter deep sleep where we don't even dream. It's very deep. And when we wake up, we say, oh, I slept really well. So the idea in Vedanta is, where this example is given, is that, well, you can't remember something that you didn't experience. So you're remembering that you slept very well, so you must have been an experiencer, even when you weren't dreaming and when you weren't physically functioning. Physical functioning means the body, dreaming means the mind. So the mind was shut off, the body, for all intents and purposes, was shut off. And you were, relatively speaking, disconnected from them, but you still existed, and it was peaceful. It was restful. It was contentless. All the content being from the mind and the body and being problematic. You got rid of all that content, all that external content, and it was just you, peaceful. So Brahman realization is contentless consciousness. So you're asking, is there any like cognitive factor in Brahman realization? Well, yes. So it's cognitive. You're aware. You're conscious. You're how would you say, you're cognitive. You're cognate. Anyway, you're of a contentless experience. And again, we use the example of deep sleep. Now, so what I would say there is that the three elements that are often used to describe the absolute, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, they're all present in all three features of the absolute, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. But how they play themselves out will be different in the different faces of the Godhead. In Brahman, well, consciousness, or existence, I should say, Sat, will be prominent. I exist. Whereas the cognitive and the bliss will be present, but lesser factors. When we go to Paramatma, then the cognitive feature is more prominent. Paramatma, for example, it knows everything, aware of everything. The yogi who has Paramatma as his ideal and ideal to realize, becomes aware of everything going on in the body. There's sort of different organs, chakras, and so on and so forth. It becomes like a little Paramatma in this microcosm of his own body and mind, right? So in Paramatma, you're moving considerably from a nirvishesh, because here, well, there's a person, Paramatma. Shantarasa is possible in relation to Paramatma, but not in relation to Nirvishesh Brahman. And in Shantarasa, one is not interested in the qualities or the leelas of Bhagavan, but the beatific vision of Paramatma forehanded, all-knowing. So cognizance, well, the cognitive factor, Chit, is more prominent in the Paramatma realization, but obviously existence is also there, eternal existence, and bliss is also there. Now we go to Bhagavan, and within Bhagavan, if we go to Krishna even further, Swami Bhagavan, then the more you go in that direction, the more the bliss becomes prominent. And existence and cognizance become lesser factors. So in Krishna consciousness, for example, we love Krishna. Love means bliss here, ananda. And the existence is like a little village. It's a small place. It's not a Brahman. It's not Vaikuntha. It's a little village and a small place. And the knowledge that he's Bhagavan is not even, a factor. Yeah, well, he's Bhagavan, whatever. Some people say that. Could be. But anyway, Interesting, but I love him as a friend, or he's my lover. This is prominent. So the equation will be different in terms of how the Sat, Chit, and Ananda play out in relation to each face of the Godhead, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Now that's answers hopefully the first part of your question. And I've written about this in Sacred Preface, I believe, and maybe in the second chapter at some length. But the second part of your question is whether we progress through Brahman realization and then Paramatma realization to come to Bhagavan realization. And the answer to that would be no. We have one ideal in mind, Bhagavan, to realize Bhagavan, and then it's as the form of Krishna, and so on and so forth. Now, in the context of becoming Krishna conscious, then we don't pass through Brahman realization and then go to Paramatma realization, and then come to Bhagavan realization. We don't find, well, in particular, of course, the Shankar's idea of Brahman realization, we don't accept that, but that is a reality. But there is Brahma Sayuja, a form of Brahman realization. But no, you're not going to get waylaid there for eons and then progress to Paramatma realization. Why would that happen? That now you will realize the Atma, the self, which is akin in some ways to Brahman, of course, is akin to Paramatma, who we come from, and to Bhagavan as well. But no, these are distinct paths. These are distinct features of the Absolute. For Gyan Marg, typically, the ideal is Brahman realization. Yoga Marg, the ideal is Paramatma realization. Bhakti Marg, the ideal is realization of the Bhagavan feature of the Absolute. And the paths are distinct. They're different from one another, so they lead naturally to different faces of the Absolute, different degrees of penetration into transcendence. That help?
Yes, thanks, Guru Maharaj.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Okay, so there's a follow-up question from Ananta Govinda from the Bay Area. He says, follow-up question on the motivated chanters. If Krishna is personally present in the name, what stops him from appearing in a qualified devotee's heart, even when he hears from a materially motivated chanter?
Well, it depends on the level of the devotee's own standing and realization. For the highest devotee, let us take Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for example. Well, just by seeing a rain cloud, he would pass out, right? Hearing a lady performing kirtan in the Jagannath temple, he ran after the temple. Srup Damodar stopped him. So the idea being that obviously, the more you advance, we can say these are the udipanas, the excitants for this rasa, another rasa, and so forth, and some of them overlap. But in the highest stage, the whole world becomes an udipana. Mahaprabhu saw a sand dune and thought it was Govardhan. He saw the ocean, thought it was the Jamuna. Again, saw the rain cloud, thought that it was Krishna's complexion. And he wept more than the rain cloud could produce, rain and water in a tsunami. So, yes, if a devotee is very advanced, then they can take advantage of any form of glorification of Bhagavan, even if that's not the intention on the part of the, in this case, kirtanir. Again, even just from nature, they can be drawn into and find Krishna, who is everywhere. So it depends on the realization. The idea that one should be cautious about what kirtan one enters into is an instruction for sadhakas, for practitioners who should be thoughtful, reflective, and use their intelligence in their practice. So if we know this type of kirtan is done as a musical performance, it's, why should we be interested in that? And we should, in the Madhyamadikari, the intermediate devotee is characterized by discrimination. So he or she makes these types of discriminations, and this way their sadhana becomes artful and meaningful rather than just mechanical, which might be more the case for the Kanishta Adhikari. So as much as our practice is becoming, our intelligence, discriminating faculty is becoming a factor in our practice, determining how to practice, when, where, and so on and so forth. To that extent, we're moving in the direction of the Madhyama. The Uttama, on the other hand, well, right. Yes, you could hear kirtan anywhere, and you could hear the lady. What was it? The barber criticizing his wife, who was named Radha, and fall into ecstasy because the barber said, "That Radha, I'm upset with her," and think it was Krishna. Gorkashore Das Babaji was being ridiculed. The anecdote is by some children in the village, and they were throwing stones at him, and he said, "Stop that, or I'll report you to your mother." And he was taking it like Krishna was harassing him, and he was going to report him to Mother Yasoda. So that's one thing. He's not a sadhaka. So this kind of instruction is for sadhakas. It's not that the name is lacking in some way, but to what extent the name may be manifest in one kirtan or another kirtan, and have profound spiritual power, that's another thing. So if it's chanting of a pure devotee, then it may have the effect to affect positively and spiritually even trees that I see out my window, for example. But to speak of willingly participate. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have some kirtanir who's doing it professionally and is only nominally, let's say, a devotee, and some very qualified person may be able to draw something from that. So you have the two ends of the spectrum. The advice, again, is for Madhyamadikaris. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Okay, nice to see you.
Okay, there's a follow-up question from Parmanand on Mara Mohan's question. He says, if Brahman realization is set and one does not transition from one to another, how do we understand the examples of Sukadev Goswami or the Kumaras who seem to have been in Brahman realization and then became great devotees?
Yes, the answer to that is that they were not practicing bhakti with a view to attain realization of Bhagavan. Sukadev was engaged in contemplating Brahman. And then he was moved from there to bhakti by hearing verses from the Bhagavatam, subsequently learning the Bhagavatam from Vyasa and so forth. So he was a convert. So he was a jnani who then got drawn from the pursuit of Brahman realization to the path of bhakti and pursued Gopi Bhav. So there are these, now again, there's other examples, the Kumaras in the Bhagavatam, those examples are there to show us the power of bhakti to draw one from the Gyan Marg and the pursuit of Brahman, which is largely thought to be, that's the goal of Hinduism, to merge with Brahman. If it weren't for Prabhupada, this would still be the prominent thinking in academia. Prabhupada changed all of that. It's really incredible to understand what Prabhupada did in his mission with regard to how people in the world, and Indologists in particular, think about Hinduism, and people in other religious traditions think about Hinduism. If it weren't for Prabhupada, before Prabhupada, it was practically 98% idea that Hinduism is about merging with Brahman. He changed all that by his canvassing, which included, hey, wait a minute here, there's 4 other types of Vedanta, they're all theistic. Even though he was presenting his own tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, he understood Gaudiya Vaishnavism to be, in a larger context, part of a composite of theistic Vedanta, Vishishta Dvaita, Dvaita, Vad, and so on and so forth, the other 4 sampradayas. And so now this is all the work of our Paribhar. It's an amazing, extraordinary, powerful accomplishment, which speaks of the bhava behind his Sankirtan. It's said in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Krishna Shakti being an ahitara. You cannot successfully spread the Sankirtan unless you have Krishna Shakti. I mean, he had great power to accomplish this. It goes unnoticed or really largely, but it's a huge shift in thinking about Hinduism in the West, and even in India. Of course, it's more prominently understood in India that there were different divisions and so forth, but still the prominence of Shankar has been really dimmed by the light of Prabhupada's campaign. So at any rate, the Bhagavatam cites examples of Navayugendras, the Kumaras, Sukadeva Goswami, to highlight the virtues of bhakti and how bhakti is a trans or a post-liberated reality, right? So Sukadeva was not practicing bhakti and passing through Brahman realization and then Paramatma realization. He was practicing Gyan and got converted to bhakti. That's a obviously central story to the whole of the Bhagavatam, right? Nirgranta api rupame. He heard Bhagavatam. He took the trouble to study the Bhagavatam. Why did he do that if he was self-realized? Because itam bhuta guna hari. Such are the qualities of Hari. Such are the itam bhuta guna hari. The qualities of Hari are such that the non-qualified or unqualified nirvishesh feature of the absolute, if you're attracted to it, but you hear from the right person, a powerful person to take you out of Brahman realization, about the qualities of Krishna, as he heard from Vyas. They are such are the qualities that they can make nirvishesh Brahman feature of the absolute seem insignificant, seem even detestable, as sometimes described by Gaudiya Acharyas. Such are his qualities. But of course, you'd have to have a very qualified person to speak. If someone has very strong samskar for Brahman realization and becomes a Jivan Mukta, to use a Gyani term like Sukadeva, to draw him out. And such was the power of Bhagavan Vyas, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. So that should answer your question. I hope it does. If not,
Maharaj, thank you.
Okay, good.
There's one more question. If you want to take it, or should we leave it for next week?
What is it?
So it's from Rasa Kelly. She asks, or she says, names have always been very significant and fascinating to me. I have always wondered about our initiated names. In some traditions, ritually given names are thought to express a quality that the member has inside that the teacher may see in them, that they can aspire to express and fulfill as they grow in practice. Sometimes these names are inspired by the teacher's relationship with the student or revealed in meditation to the teacher as the initiation approaches. Do our names in this tradition have a deeper significance than we should meditate on? Or are they simply a marker of us as devotees, which of course is certainly significant in and of itself? Thank you.
I think the latter is more the reality, and the name Das, Dasi, is the emphasis to give a name of Krishna and the servant of Krishna. Is more the reality when you get particularly to a larger kind of a situation of, like for example, in Prabhupada's mission, he had many disciples. Now, if you're in a smaller setting with a few disciples and a guru, which is more of the classical kind of a setting in the past, then the guru may give a name that has more correspondence with the nature of the person whom he understands, having spent time with them, personally, in terms of their identity in this life, and connecting it with, their prospect of transcendence. There is a method for choosing the name given in Hari Bhakti Vilas that has astrological considerations. An abbreviated form of that was employed by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, assuming, as he did, I would say, that the Hindu name, the Hindu parents that gave the children the name took into consideration astrological insights on the natal, chart. And I forget the detail of it, but from an astrological point of view, dependent upon, precisely the phase of the moon or something like that, then a name would be given, and then Bhaktisiddhanta would keep the first letter of that given name. And, if it was Hari, then I think he would keep it. When he gave harinama, when he gave mantra diksha, he might change it, like to Haricharan Das. Prabhupada's name was Abhay Charan, and he gave him the name Abhay Charanaravinda. Or he might change it more, depends. Some names would be that children have wouldn't necessarily be in relation to Vishnu. So, but so he followed that, to some extent. In the Braja Leela, it's said that the girls were all named after Lita, Vishaka, Radha, and so forth, after the wives of Daksha, which I think correspond with different phases of the moon. So relative to where they were, when they were born, astrologically speaking, then they would get a name like that. So there are that, and that's, of course, now what to do about that, right? Your name is Harry or Bob, and those considerations weren't in place, and so on and so forth. And so it's a little more difficult. And he, take my situation. Well, I have disciples from different countries and so forth. I'm not living with them. and so on. But as much as I know a person in terms of their present reality, and if I can detect some spiritual background in them as well, which is not everybody has that to the same extent, then I will try to come up with a name that would be have a little more significance in the way that you're asking about. But if I'm not in that situation, then I would tend to try to give them a unique name anyway, as far as possible. So given that, I think, yeah, we have to gravitate more towards Dasi. This is the surname, if you will. But you have a nice name. I very much liked giving that name to you.
Thank you for your answer,
So,
Maharaj.
okay, there she is. Are you in Canada?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Toronto? Yeah.
Yeah, slightly outside now, but I was when I was initiated. Yeah.
Can't hear you, but you see you're nodding
Oh,
your head
sorry.
somewhere in Canada.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know why it's not. Yeah, but thank you.
Okay. All right. Nice to be with you all. And yeah, I think I will be here again next Sunday. What date is next Sunday?
Yeah, I think it's just before you leave for Chile.
Right. I don't know if I don't doubt if I'll be broadcasting from Chile and Brazil. I'll be there for 2 weeks, but look forward to being with you all next week. Go Bhakti-vrinda ki jai. Go to Premanande.
Shri Guru Maharaj ki jai. So a couple announcements. The bigger announcement is that we are going to be changing our Zoom ID. The address is going to change from the beginning of April. And we'll give you, we don't have it quite yet, but we will give it to you, well in advance. So there's not going to be any problem. It's just, there's going to be a new password and ID, and that's all. And the second thing is just a small announcement about the Tattva Vivek series. We're going to have Brigupad give a class on the third verse of the first canto, first chapter of the Bhagavatam. So, and that's going to be next Thursday. So that's all for now. And I wish to see you all next Sunday.